Good afternoon, everyone. How's it going? You guys enjoying the conference so far? All right, so thanks a lot for coming to this session. It's the last session of a conference, the last time slot of sessions at the conference, so I really appreciate that you guys took the time to come to this session rather than any of the other 5 awesome sessions that are going on at the same time. If you just got confused and went to the wrong room, it's your last chance to leave now. We're going to be talking about importing and transforming data using Power BI Desktop. My name is Miguel Llopis. You might remember me from famous movies like What's New in the Power BI Desktop February Update, or 44 new features in the last Power BI Desktop update. You know, all awesome hits. I'm actually probably up for the next year Academy Awards. We'll see. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what are we going to cover in this session. We're basically going to talk about what are the main challenges around data acquisition, data preparation, and then I'm also going to do a bunch of demos. We're going to cover all of the basic connectivity modes that we have in Power BI Desktop, including things like importing data, using direct query, using live analysis services, connectivity. And then I'm also going to focus on the import mode capabilities. I'm going to cover a lot of the data preparation and transformation options that you get, and we're going to do lots and lots of demos covering things like connectivity to relational data sources, different types of files, folders with a bunch of files, web sources, doing mashups. So it's actually going to be, hopefully, a really nice session. I'm aware that, right after the lunch break, and by the way, I'm from Spain, so we have this thing we invented, it's called siesta. So my other main goal for the session is going to make sure you guys don't fall asleep. I made sure there was enough coffee on the coffee drips outside, just on your way in, so hopefully you got your reload of caffeine, and we're all set to go. The last bullet I'm going to cover also, so just we make things a little bit more exciting, is that you're going to see a few features that are not in the product yet and are coming either on the March update, which, by the way, will go out later this week, or in the April update, which will go out in about a month from now. You'll see features here and there, and then if we have some time at the end, I'll go into more details about each of them. With that, let's talk a little bit about challenges with data acquisition. How many of you think data acquisition is challenging? It's difficult to do. Data is messy. You don't know where to find the data. You don't know, once you found the right database or the right file to connect to, you sometimes don't know which tool to use to connect. And you have many different ways of connecting to data, many disjoint and fragmented experiences. So depending on the data source that you're trying to connect to, you're going to have to use a different tool. That makes it really, really hard for someone to actually be able to control and be proficient with all of these tools. And let's not even talk about doing things like reshaping that data once you've connected to it. That's even more tedious. In fact, if you look at some of the studies that have been done, like research studies that have been done around data analytics, some studies will tell you that about 75% or 80% of the time for the average data analyst is spent on data acquisition and data preparation. So the other 20% is when you actually put some lipstick, make some pretty charts and so on, which is the fun part. But the previous 80%, it's the foundation. If you miss that foundation, if you don't have a solid data set, a solid data model to work on top of, you're missing basically what you need to actually build up a good report or a good analysis. With that, by the way, I'm wearing my I Love Data t-shirt. Even when the data is messy, I still love it. So we're going to go do some data prep with it. OK, the last few challenges. Sometimes when you do this data preparation, the tasks are something that you'll need to repeat next time. So maybe you need to update your report every month. And with many of the tools that you use today, those actions are not repeatable. You need to reapply them manually every time that you want to update your analysis or your report. And then it's not only hard to connect to a single data source and to reshape data and then to repeat that over time, but imagine when you have to combine data coming from multiple data sources. It's really hard to connect and bring the data together. With Power BI Desktop, we actually give you a few different ways of doing that very easily. The last point here is about the 3 Bs of big data. How many of you have heard about these 3 Bs of big data? Fun joke, maybe you've also heard about this whole thing about big data being like teenage sex. Someone's heard about that? So it's basically like everyone talks about it. Everyone would like to know how to do it. Everyone thinks that everyone else is doing it, so everyone, even when they don't know what it really means, they actually pretend that they're doing it. So that's big data. So there's these 3 Bs. The volume of the data, of course, large data set, millions of rows per table. The second V is the velocity of change. You're connecting to different types of data sources, and each of them might update at different update frequencies. You might be connecting to a products database that updates once every 6 months or every year when you update your product line. And at the same time, you might be connecting to a sales database, which actually might update every day or maybe every minute. So how you actually correlate data from all of those data sources into a single report and make sure that your report is consistent. We have solutions for that with Power BI Desktop. So how does Power BI Desktop help? First, it gives you access to a wide range of data sources. We have about 53 data sources right now in Power BI Desktop. We continue adding new data sources every month. In fact, we're going to add 2 more for the March update coming out this week. So soon I'll have to update my slide to say 55, which is like a double high five anyways. But the second bullet here is that you can actually connect to data of any size and any shape. This is a really important point and actually something that really distinguishes Power BI Desktop from many other solutions out there for self-service BI. It's the notion of being able to connect to your external data source and get a by example preview of the data. That's giving you a few hundred rows. In some cases, it's up to 1,000 rows. And you can actually get a sense for what that data looks like, for what the shape is in terms of the columns, the content of each column. And it gives you an idea enough that you can actually reshape your data within the query editor environment in Power BI Desktop. But importantly, you're not actually downloading the entire data set up front. That's really critical when you're dealing with data of big size. You can actually do this by example, and after you've done with your entire query logic, then you say apply and close, and at that point is when it actually runs over the entire data set. The third point here is that we give you this really easy to use experience to reshape data by example, point and click, really easy to use, hundreds of transformations out of the box. But we also make that consistent. So we support, as I said, double high five of data sources. The experience in terms of the data transformations that you can afford for each of them is exactly the same. In some cases where you are connecting to a smart data backend, like for instance SQL Server, Power BI Desktop will realize that if you do a filter operation in the query editor environment, or if you do a group by operation, that operation could actually translate to T-SQL, and it will actually do so, and it will offload the operation to the underlying data source. In other cases where you're connecting to something more dummy, like for instance a CSV file, in that case, if you do a group by operation in Power BI Desktop, there is no backend to offload to, right? So in those cases, Power BI Desktop will compensate, and it will run that operation locally. Even more, when you're actually handling data or combining data to do a mashup across SQL Server and CSV, it will also do this kind of smart operations, and it might also end up sending data from one to another to actually figure out the right or the more performance folding or query optimization plan for your specific query logic. So a lot of sophisticated stuff that we give you out of the box to handle connectivity to all of these data sources, handling big data, small data, any kind of data on any data source. The last point here is kind of going into the same, that you can actually very easily combine those data sources or data from all of those data sources together. We have a few different ways of connecting data. We're going to cover a couple of them. One of them is you have 2 tables, and you would like to bring the columns from this table into this other one, so you can actually add it like that. That's, in database terms, it's a join operation. You can do that in Power BI Desktop with the merge queries operation. Or if you've already loaded into the data model, you could actually do a join in DAX as well. The other alternative there, of course, would be to actually load multiple tables and use relationships between them in the model. Now, the second way of combining data would be to append data. So you basically have 2 tables, and you would like to get more rows added to the bottom. That's what we call append queries. It's the equivalent to a union operation in database terms. So you could do that in the query editing experience. You could also do a calculated table in the data model itself and create a union statement with DAX. So lots of flexibility for you to do that kind of combination. Another kind of combination that we provide is the ability to combine data from multiple files coming from the same folder into a single logical view. We're actually going to cover that in a demo today. That's really powerful stuff. And the last way, of course, is to create parameterized queries, basically function queries that could take values from a data set and send it to another. The example that I started with, a CSV file with product IDs, for instance, and a database, a SQL Server database with sales data. You could actually take all of the product IDs from the CSV file and send them into a filter statement to actually filter down the table with sales information to just narrow it down to a specific set of product IDs. So you could all do that with, in that case, with function queries. You'll be able to parameterize your queries. And there's actually some new stuff that's coming there as well over the next few months to make it even easier for you to do through the UI. With that, let's go into a very high-level overview. We're going to do something very easy. It's going to be connecting to an Excel file. But before doing that, let me, OK, you got my screen? Great. So we're going to go into Power BI Desktop. We're going to go into my favorite screen. That's a Get Data dialog. Here is where we have the dialog showing up. See, the dialog is taking a siesta. All right. Welcome back, dialog. OK, here we go. So we exposed connectivity to, as I said, 53, 55 data sources. Something that you'll notice new here is going to be SharePoint folder. Let's talk about that a bit more later. Databases, something that you're going to see new here is also SAP BW. That's coming as early as this week. How many of you use SAP BW, Business Warehouse? All right, so we're putting it out for preview this week in the March update. A few other databases, of course, not just the best ones like SQL Server Access and Analysis services, but all of the other third-party ones that we need to handle as well. Azure services, of course, being a Microsoft cloud, we have connectivity to most of the Azure data services out there, even the ones that are in beta, like, for instance, it's things like Spark, DocumentDB for NoSQL databases, or Azure Data Lake. This is a new category, actually, online services. This is also coming in, I think it's in the April update, but it's a split. We used to have all of these sources under other sources, but that list got too long, so we actually divided that in two lists. So we have things here like connectivity to SharePoint lists, Exchange, Dynamic CRM, Facebook, Google Analytics, Salesforce, and a bunch of other SaaS services, you know, QuickBooks, Marketo, you name it. We keep adding things here every month as well. The other category is other types of services as well. So for instance, things like OData feeds, web pages. We're going to do a demo about extracting data from the web as well in this session. Hadoop, Active Directory. ODBC is the great escape path. So whenever you need to connect to something that we don't support out of the box, that's probably an ODBC driver out there who can do it for you. And then you hook it up through the ODBC option here. RScript. Being able to bring data from an R environment, extracting R data frames based on an R script that you created in your R environment. So those are all great options. In this case, let's go and connect to an Excel file. It's probably the most common data source out there for BI. And we're going to connect to a file that's in my demos folder, Data Insights, Power BI Desktop. It's this file. But before connecting to it, let me actually show you what the file looks like in Excel. You might look at this file and you might understand that this is some sort of sales report because it has some numbers, it has some product categories, and then it has some years and some cities. Now, because you're so smart, you'll actually look at this and say, yeah, sure, I see Seattle in column B, and I assume that it means that this entire range has sales for Seattle, and then the intersection would be sales for bikes product category in 2002 in Seattle. You understand that because you're such a smart person, but a tool doesn't really understand that out of the box. You'll need to, as part of your data preparation and data reshaping operation, you'll need to tell the tool how to understand this data. So you can actually start grouping these values and analyzing trends and so on. So that's exactly what we're going to do in this first demo. I'm going to go import that spreadsheet. And Power BI Desktop will now analyze the content of the workbook, and it will actually list all of the spreadsheets and name ranges that contain data. In this case, there's just that spreadsheet one. Now, at this point, I could either hit load, and it would bring this exact table into the data model. And if it's in the right shape, probably that's all you need to do in terms of data preparation. You just straight into building your report. In this case, and in many real-world scenarios, you'll actually want to click the Edit button, which will give you access to the Query Editor dialog. This is my other favorite dialog in Power BI Desktop, is the toolbox for you to actually go and do data preparation stuff. As you can see here, we have a few areas. First, you have your queries navigator on the left. You can fold close that if you want to focus on your query preview, which is the other main area. You get a bunch of steps on the side. We'll look at that a little bit later. But then what you get on the ribbon are all the transformation capabilities that you can actually afford through the UI. And this is really a point-and-click kind of UI. So I could go and do things like going into the transform tab, and in this case, I need to turn rows into columns. So I need to do a transpose table operation. That shows up here on the ribbon. Under the transform tab, I have transpose. If I do that, notice how the data shape changed now in the preview. So I got more columns, basically, because I got a new column per year. Now, the next thing that I need to do here, you see how I don't really have column headers right now. I have just column 1 through column 14. But the first row actually looks like it could be the headers because it's the year. So I can now click Use First Row as Headers to actually promote that first row. So now this is starting to look better. But let's take a look at this first column. I have, as we were looking at before, I have Seattle on the first row, but then I have 2 nulls. And likewise for Portland and Vancouver. So what I need to do is actually something that's called fill down. And that's going to basically fill the Seattle value down to every null cell below until it finds something that's non-empty, like in this case, Portland. So that's also available here on the transform tab. I could do fill down or fill up. Let's go ahead and do a fill down. So that's starting to look even much better. Now I can just go ahead and clean up my column names. So let's say that that's my city, and these are my product categories. Now the next thing I need to do is basically unpivot all of the other year columns. I want to turn all of this stuff into actually rows, 1 row per year, and then get the actual total sales for each city and category on that year. To do that, I could select these columns and do unpivot. But if I do that, I'm actually going to be doing a lot of selection, I guess. In this case, I already did. But the other way to do this would be select the other 2 and click unpivot other columns. And that will basically take all of the other columns that I did not select and unpivot them. More importantly, this is actually future-proof for your benefit. Because if next year you add a new column that has data for 2016 sales, the query that we generate behind the scenes, it actually will pick up that new column as well, and it will also unpivot it. This is not common to many other tools where you actually need to go back and modify that logic to add that column to the pivot. But we give you that out of the box, which is great. So let's actually go and fix the column headers. That would be year, and that would be my total sales. And now I can just make sure that I have the right data types. I'm going to turn this one into a fixed decimal number. So we did a bunch of transforms. In fact, I call this demo the rubrics cube because of all the transpose and unpivots and stuff that we do. And if you look now at the steps pane, at the pane here on the right, you see that we've created a bunch of steps. And you can actually go back to the beginning and replay them. I can go back to the beginning of my table. We did some automatic type detection. I transpose, I promoted headers. So I can always go back to these steps and either delete them or insert a step in between the existing ones, or I can modify some of them. Like for instance, if the source file changes, I could come to the source step, click that gear icon, and then I get access to the file path, and I could change that again. The same goes for any other step that I did. I can either modify them through the gear for the cases where I actually got a dialog to create the step, or worst case, I could always go and enable the formula bar, which you could do through the View tab. And here I can see the actual code that got generated for that step. So for instance, the rename column step had this look and feel. It actually said rename column 1 to city and rename column 2 to categories. So I could change that on the fly as well on the formula bar. In fact, if I go to the advanced editor view, also through the View tab, I'll get the entire underlying M, which is the name of our query language, the M query language, mashup query language, the M statements that got generated behind the scenes. So our overall principle is that we'll try to do as much as we can through the UI, give you that flexibility to do everything through the UI, generate the code behind, and we give you the options to always go and either tweak this code or start from scratch if you want. But we're trying to make more and more we can through the UI to simplify the learning curve for you. With that, let's go and call these sales. And at that point, I'm ready to just go and click Close and Apply. And now it's when we actually run this entire query or this query logic through the entire file. And we actually loaded this. So now it is ready for us to go and create our report. OK, so that would be for the first demo. From here, I could party on my data and start creating beautiful charts. Let's go and take a look at the second section. So I actually wanted to talk about different data connectivity modes that we provide. What you just saw is the import mode. It's the first column here. The typical scenario there is that you'd like to do ETL on your data and basically do data download. So basically download the data into your local Power BI desktop data model, just like we did with this spreadsheet. I could do that against any of the 53 data sources that we support. It's the default mode supported for all data sources. There's no max number of data sources for report. As you're going to see in the next few demos, we're going to be bringing data from multiple data sources into the same Power BI desktop report and combining them all together. You can do hundreds of transformations, as you saw, through the ribbon, through the M language directly. There's lots of flexibility and power for you to create those query transformation logic. And you could do mashups, you could do merge, appends, and you could do parameterized queries, as we were talking about earlier. When it comes down to modeling capabilities, which I didn't get to cover on the demo, you could do everything. You could create relationships across tables. You could create calculated columns, tables. You could create measures. You could create custom hierarchies, which is something we just shipped last month as well. The second mode is direct query. So direct query is slightly different from import in the sense that you still select a specific tables from that data source to import, and you can still perform some level of ETL, but there is no data download involved. Instead of that, once you create your queries, you will actually end up transferring the definition of those queries into the data model and the report layer in a way that actually, as you create different charts, each specific chart in your report may issue queries against the underlying data source. Like for instance, if you're connecting to that sales database that we were talking about and you were doing a total sales by product, it would actually issue a T-SQL statement to do a group by of total sales by product ID. And we're actually going to cover that in the next demo. Now, there's some caveats here, like for instance, in terms of the data transformations that you can apply with direct query, it depends on whatever the underlying data source supports. Like for instance, against SQL Server, you could do things like group by, filter operations, but there are other things like maybe a split column operation or unpivot operation that is not natively supported in T-SQL. So those would actually require you to switch into import mode again. We'll see that in the demo in a minute. You could still do merge and join operations, but you can actually only connect to a single data source at a time when you're using direct query mode. In terms of modeling capabilities, this is something that initially we were very limited when we first shipped the first few versions of direct query a few months ago. But in the last few months, we've shipped the ability to create calculated columns, to create measures, and coming new in March, we're actually letting you change the column types from within the report and the data views as well. The last mode is live and exploration mode, which is something that you'll want to use against analysis services, and we support both analysis services, tabular and multidimensional models, and it will basically allow you to create reports working against a remote data model, in this case a remote cube, and that translates through the rest of these columns at the bottom, where you can see that you can only connect to a single model at a time, and there is no real way for you to actually transform or modify the model itself. So it basically assumes that everything that you need to create that report already exists in that analysis services model. Call it a measure, call it a hierarchy, it all needs to exist in that underlying data model. With that, let's go into the demo. Let's cover a couple of connectivity modes. We already talked about import, so I'm going to do a demo about direct query, and I'm going to do another demo about analysis services live. And for this demo, I actually require VPN access. So, okay, it says I'm connected. Let's hope that that's true. All right, so let's go into this Power BI desktop window. We'll go regular through get data. In this case, we're going to connect to SQL Server. And I'm going to provide my SQL Server name. This is sitting in our office in Redmond main campus. So it actually came back pretty quickly. That's nice. I'm going to go look for my favorite database. Anyone knows which one that is? Northwind. All right. So we're going to go and build a sales report based on Northwind data. And we're going to go bring a few different tables. We could start by bringing the categories table, customers, maybe we bring orders, order details. We could bring products as well. So at this point, I'm going to assume that my data is clean. I'm going to click load instead of edit. Once I click load, I'm going to be presented with this connection settings dialog. This is basically letting me pick between import and direct query mode. We're going to go and do direct query. And notice how this create connections dialog now says creating live connections, create a connection, and boom, it's done. It didn't even let me finish my sentence, but it basically didn't spend any time downloading data. It's just in this connected mode. In fact, if you look at the bottom right of the screen, it says direct query enabled. And from here, you could actually switch to import if you really want it. It basically tells me that I'm live connected to this data source. At this point, I could say, for instance, create a new measure in this case. Let's go ahead and create a new measure under order details. I could do something like total sales and say equals some x of, within the order details table, I could do unit price multiplied by the quantity of units. That's going to give me the total sales. Now I can drag that to the canvas. And it's going to look, see, it takes some time. You see that there's a spinny. That lag is because it actually issued a T-SQL query, and it went all the way through the 520 highway and into main campus and ran in the server. That's why it took a few seconds. If I switch this to a card, it's actually going to look ugly. Let's go and change that. All right. I can change that through my formatting here. I'll say I want 2 decimal numbers, so it looks better. If I do something a little bit more fancy, like for instance, bring all of the categories, I'm going to turn that into a bar chart, and I'm going to bring the same total sales field into the value. You see that it took actually a little bit less. We do some level of optimization here in terms of some level of caching for some of this information. And usually the second and third queries are a bit faster. You get everything else like cross-filtering. If I select each of these categories, everything else updates. So it's just a regular report, but it might take some additional lag to refresh the data because it's doing the whole round trip with the underlying data source. Another thing that I could do in direct query mode, I could go into the edit queries dialog, and I could do some transformations here. Like for instance, I could filter out some categories. Maybe I want to filter out beverages. That's all fine. It didn't tell me to actually switch to import mode. It just works because we actually know how to execute a filter in T-SQL. If I were to do something more complex, like maybe I think split, let's actually do an unpivot operation. Let's say that for some reason I wanted to unpivot this column. When I do that, I get this yellow warning on top that says, this results in a query that is no longer supported in direct query mode, so you can actually switch to import. If you really don't want to do that, then just remove your transform, and then you're back to a regular direct query query. All right, so that's all good. You guys like direct query mode? You've played with it in the past. So we're adding it to more and more data sources. You saw in the previous slide that we just added it for Oracle and Teradata. It was a preview in February. We're actually making it a GA feature in March, in the March update. And we're going to continue adding more and more support for direct query to additional data sources over time. So just keep that feedback coming, and we'll work on it. The next one that I wanted to show you is connectivity to a live analysis services model. So let's go into a new Power BI desktop report. And in this case, I'm going to connect to an analysis services multidimensional model. I'm going to go to the database group, SQL Server Analysis Services database, and I'm going to provide my server name. I could pick between connect live and import data at this stage. I'm going to say connect live. And this is going to bring me to the navigator dialog. Let's see if this AS is live or dead, depending on the connection. But this is going to basically bring me into the navigator dialog. Hopefully it comes back. It says I'm connected. All right, let's give it 5 more seconds. It's complaining. Let's try again. OK, it's asking me for creds now. I'm going to say Windows auth. All right, it's going slow, but I think it's working. Actually cancel out and go through recent sources. Live connection. All right, so it looks like live connection is dead. Sorry about that, guys. I think my VPN is playing with me. But basically, what I wanted to show you is how, in this case, I could go through the navigator dialog and select the specific cube that I wanted to connect to. And then I would land here in the report view. See, there's no connectivity. I would land here in the report view, and I would have all of my data model artifacts, all of my cube artifacts, including dimensions, measures, hierarchies, KPIs, and so on, all available within the fields pane, and I would be able to just drag and drop them into the canvas to create my report. The other interesting thing to cover in the live mode is that you would not be able to access the query editor, neither the data model or the relationships view. You're just working against that remote data model. Going back to the deck, calling it downward connectivity mode, let's actually go and try and do some more of the import scenarios. In this case, we're going to go and bring some data from the web. Let's actually stick to, let's actually launch a new Power BI desktop window. While that loads, let's actually say that I want to bring in data from this website. There's this table in this web page that I would like to create a report on. It has information about the domestic gross for movies in 2015, and it has information about the different studios, for instance, and the total gross, the number of theaters that these movies were on. I would like to create a report on top of that. And I would like to do it in a way that actually I could refresh this report and maybe get fresher data later. Now, 2015 is a done deal, but if I were to do this in 2016 report, I would get new data every week. So I would really like to refresh that report. All I need to do is grab that URL, go back to Power BI Desktop. I'm going to go to this instance, go to Get Data. We go under the Other category and pick Web. We specify that URL. With the Web Connector, you can actually connect to either HTML tables to scrape data from HTML pages to scrape data from tables, basically tables in HTML. Or you could also connect to web APIs. Any REST-based APIs, JSON endpoints, they all work just fine with a web connector. In this case, because it's HTML table, we actually parsed that page and we detected these two tables. Table 1 is the actual that I want. I would like to actually reshape that a little bit, so I'm going to go Edit. And I would like to remove a few columns. So I'm actually just going to keep those, remove the other columns. Maybe I want to fix that column name, its title. This one is actually just the total gross. And I could also change the data type, so it's not text, it's a fixed decimal number. And the second one here is number of theaters, which is also a number. It's a whole number in that case. And that's my movies table. So it's all looking good, apparently. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you're going to see that we got these errors in the last 3 rows. So what's that about? If I click in the background of one of them, we actually get this detail view, and it says that we couldn't convert the value of that cell to a number. And the value of that cell turned out to be something like summary of 697 movies. If we go back to the original data source, to the web page, and we scroll all the way to the bottom, we see that there's actually these 3 rows at the bottom of the HTML table that they actually don't follow the same structure. So we need to exclude that in some way from our data. Something that we could do is from here just select that column and say I would like to remove errors that will basically remove rows with errors or rows that contain error in that currently selected column. I could have done something different, which was even before changing the data type, I could come to the ribbon and say I'm going to remove some rows and I'm going to remove bottom rows. So I'm going to remove the bottom 3 rows. And that way I'll just make sure that I only have 100 and there's nothing with the broken data in there. I can now fix the column type to say whole number. This guy over here is fixed decimal number, so I'm all good. I could go now and close and apply, and I'm going to get 100 movies here. But there's an issue, though, that maybe some of you caught. This page actually has only 100, but there's another page that has 100 to 200, and then all the way to 697. So how do we actually fix that? If you look at the URL, turns out that the page is actually passed here as a parameter, page equals 1. So we're going to actually parameterize this query so that it can take a page number, and then we're going to invoke that to get all the pages. Let's, where am I? I think it is this guy over here. Yep, that's my movies. So let's go back into the query editor. We're going to parameterize this query. We're going to go into the advanced editor, and we're going to add a parameter. That's the syntax would be adding parentheses, the name of your parameter, and then equal sign and greater than. So that basically, if there's one line of M code that you want to learn, it is this one. It's the way to pass a parameter to your queries. And now I'm going to use that parameter here. So all I need to do is actually change this URL so that it actually gets dynamically constructed. And I'm going to do first chunk here is going to be fixed up to that page equals. And then I'm going to do ampersand, which is the syntax for concatenating values or appending string values. And I'm going to do number to text of page. So I'm going to basically turn that number into a text string. And then I'm going to do an ampersand. I'm going to open double quotes again. And then I'm just going to say concatenate with the rest of the URL. And this turns into a function. Now at this point, I could actually invoke this function for a single page, or I could actually invoke this over a table. Now I know that there were actually seven pages in that site, but I could even create more. So let's say I want to create something that pulls the first 10 pages if they exist. So I'm going to go do a blank query and do 1 through 10. And I get a list of numbers. I can turn that into a table. And from here, I can add a column, adding a custom column that will basically allow me to do movies given the page number. That's column 1. And that's going to run now 10 times the same query with that specific change in the URL. You see that the first 7 return tables. If I click on the background, you're going to see the results for that specific line. So these are movies 1 through 100. Then 101 to 300, and so on. For these ones, you get an error saying that that page didn't exist. We couldn't retrieve that page. What you could do at this point is kind of leverage the same approach that we did before with remove errors. So I can do that to just remove the ones that don't have. So this question comes up a lot. How do you know how many pages to pull? You could just create 1 through 100 and then exclude it that way. At this point, I can now expand and promote those nested data columns into the top level. I can do expand, and I get my 697 rows here. I can then remove that first column and make sure that I have the right types, which I could actually just select these two and go into transform and do a detect data type. Will automatically detect the best type for you. So now this is my real all movies table. And now from here, of course, I can just close and apply, load this. The other table is actually going to go away because now it's a function and we don't really load functions into the report because they're just ways of getting data. They're not actually data. So I just end up with all movies. And now I could do something really simple, like maybe create a bar chart to show total gross by studio. There you go. So you actually can see if we sort by the total gross that Buena Vista, Universal, Fox, Warner Bros. They were the studios that made the highest gross in 2015. And we could continue our analysis from there, I guess. We have about 12 minutes left, and I still have a bunch of demos to show you, so let's keep going. The next one is going to be importing data from folders. Imagine the following scenario, and I'm going to load Power BI Desktop in the background to parallelize. I have this folder with a bunch of CSV files. Each of these CSV files is about 40 megabytes, I think, and each of them contains daily stock data for a bunch of different stock quotes from the New York Stock Exchange. This actually, even Excel is struggling to load my CSV file now. At some point, it might load it. OK, here you go. All of my files look like this. They have stock symbols, all of them that start with an A, all of them that start with a B, and so on. And we have daily stock dates since 2006 to about 2010, something like that. I was thinking about using recent stock data, but that wouldn't be fair to certain BI companies out there, so I wouldn't want to make fun of them or anything. But let's just stick to data like during the economic downturn, which is just behind us. So let's actually go and connect to this data from Power BI Desktop. I'm going to go get data, and I'm going to go under the File menu. It's here, so I have folder. Something new that I mentioned earlier is SharePoint folder. So whatever I'm going to show you now with File System folder, you're going to be able to do with SharePoint folder as well. Pull a bunch of files from SharePoint and be able to combine them into a single one. I can get to browse. I'm going to go browse. This is under work folders, demos, and Data Insights Summit, Power BI Desktop, stock data. Click OK. Now we're going to go connect and retrieve the list of files that exist in this folder. This we give you as a preview. You could load this, and I guess you could run some analytics on the file size or something like that. Might be useful in some cases, but in this one, what we really want to do is go into the query editor and actually reshape the data in those files rather than the metadata that we get at the top level. So here I get the names, I get the extensions. I could even filter out. Imagine that I had different types of extension files in here. I could do a lot of filtering. I could filter by last modified, when the file was created. I could even access file attributes, like, for instance, the file size, whether the file is locked or not, encrypted, and so on. I also get the entire folder path here, which in many cases you would like to keep. In this case, actually, what I'm going to do is combine all of these files. So we have this magic button under the content column, which each of them is the binary contents for each file. We have this mysterious icon here, which will basically do combine. It's also available here on the ribbon, combine binaries. When I click that guy, we're actually going to go and combine all of these CSV files. This works for both text and CSV files. It's going to combine all of them into a single file. They all look the same, so it gives me this structure. And it's actually already concatenated all. Now, there's a catch here. For the first file, we actually analyzed, and we realized that we could promote the first row as headers. For the next file that comes 40 megabytes later, we still haven't even processed that, because remember, we're working on a data sample. What you could do is come and filter, and you'll actually want to exclude that column header. So what I did was just go to the filter menu, click load more values, and now we're actually scanning additional files, which hopefully we find here. And we found, that there's NYSE, which is the actual content on the data, and then exchange is the headers for the next file. So I want to make sure I exclude that, because otherwise it's going to break my report later. OK, so at this point, I can just pick a subset of the columns. Maybe I want to keep the symbol, the date, the stock price at open, and the stock price at close, maybe also the stock volume, remove the other columns. So I can do all of that reshape. And notice how this is amazingly fast. I'm working against 28 different files, one per letter in the alphabet, with 28 letters, right? In Spain, we have more letters, by the way. And for each of those, I have about 40 megabytes. So that's a few hundred megabytes, of data. Maybe even up to a gigabyte if I'm doing my math right. But we actually do this very interactively, very easy. I could do things now, like, for instance, select close and open, and I could add a new column that maybe does a subtraction. I can call this the date difference. I could make sure that I have the right values, the right types. So maybe let's go back and say these are all decimal number. OK, that's all great. So now when I click close and apply is when we are actually going to go and run this against the entire data set. You're going to see how we'll start loading megabytes and megabytes from file A.csv. Then we're going to move on to B.csv. So this is going to take about half a minute, hopefully. Let's actually do something better. Let's cancel that. So I would like to not look at the stock information for all of these files. I would actually like to look only at the data for the companies that show up in the SAP 500 index, right? Which, as the own name indicates, it actually has the 505 common stocks. True, they come from 500 large companies, but they're 505 stocks. So I got that list on Wikipedia, right? I have this table with all the information about those companies, and I would like to bring that into my report in a way that I actually can subset these gigabytes of data for daily stock prices based on those SAP 500 companies. So let's go and connect again through the web. I'm going to do web scraping again. And in this case, we're going to find a couple of tables here. There's SAP 500 component. That's the one I want. And within the query editor, so I click OK, I get loaded here. Let's say that I want to keep the symbols, security. Let's keep the sector and the sub-industry, and maybe also the address. Remove the other columns. Maybe I could split the address column by delimiter. Maybe we could use the comma, rightmost, and then I end up getting the state as the new column. But there's a catch here. There's an extra space at the beginning, so we could go into the transform, go to format, and then trim to actually remove that extra space. So now this is the state, and this is the address. OK, and the rest looks good. So now I'm going to go and merge this data with the stock data. I'm going to go and basically go back to the stock data table, go to the Home tab, go to Merge Queries. Remember, I had over a gigabyte of data in that table, and then I have only 505 rows in the SAP 501. I can now merge these by ticker symbol. I get different types of join kinds. In this case, I'm going to do an inner join, which is basically only keep the matching rows in the output table. We are doing some estimates here based on the matches on the data previews, and we're going to give you some numbers. Well, we don't really need to wait for that, and I'm kind of in a rush because I have 5 minutes left. So I'll just click next, and now it's when we're actually doing that join. We're going to bring a new column. So we're basically adding a new column to the stock data table that has nested data coming from the SAP 500 column. See how we're actually analyzing down here, file A. Almost there, come on. Okay, it's taking longer than I thought, not sure why. Okay, so I guess I'll keep going. What I wanted to show after that is how you could expand data from that second table, kind of what we did with the movies in the previous one, where we expanded nested data for each row. And then I wanted to actually run a report. It was interesting because I was going to look at the biggest day or single day difference in terms of a stock price at open versus close per day. And anyone knows which day was the worst for stock prices? It was October 9th, 2008, which happened to be my 24th birthday. I wish someone had bought some stock for me. I would be rich by now, but it didn't happen. Anyways, sorry about the connectivity or the slugginess there. I'll just cancel that. And I'll go back to my deck. So I wanted to show you that, and I wanted to then reinforce the notion of combining data. We did that merge. And then I wanted to jump into the coming soon. So I have 4 minutes for that. Let's show a few different things. Let's switch to an existing report. So I have this sales report here. And if I go to the query editor, I have a few different queries. And I have organized them by groups. How many of you use query groups to organize your queries? All right. How many of you like to move queries around groups? And you actually do things like right-click, move to group, and so on. Wouldn't it be cool to just say, you know, I want to drag these categories into my other group? Or even if I have multiple, like let's say I have, let's say duplicate that guy. I want to move these 2 queries to the products group, so I can move them in chunks. Or I could even move an entire group to another group, and then I have a subgroup under that one, you know, and create more complex hierarchies. So that's all coming really, really soon. We also plan to do that eventually for steps in the steps pane as well, to make it much easier for you to move things around and reorganize. What else is new, and it's coming soon? Let's go to this file, conditional columns. Let's talk a little bit about that scenario. This is something that, you know, in line with our efforts to give you as much as we can through the UI, rather than having you to type custom code, custom M code, we run into this a lot. I have a table where I have some values. In this case, I have data about weight and height for people, and then I have calculated the BMI. And I would actually like to bucketize these people on whether they are underweight, they are normal weight, they are over, obese, and so on. If I were to do this the classic way, I would have to come into the custom column dialog and start doing things like if BMI, you know, lower than 18.5, then underweight, else, if, blah, 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 right? Pretty tedious. Something that we are going to add really soon is this new conditional column entry under the add column ribbon. So when you go in, it's going to give you this new experience to add a conditional column, and you can define different types of conditions. First thing I'm going to do is give a new column name. So let's say that this is the BMI bucket. I can add new rules. So basically, it's as it reads. If, and I could specify either a column name or a specific value, like I could even type in here. But in this case, I'm going to do if BMI, and then we detect that BMI is a number, so then we give you all sorts of number filters that you can apply today. We're going to add complex filters in the future as well. So in this case, I could say if BMI is less than, and then I could either reference another column for the value or type in. So I'm going to say 18.5. Then I could either output a different column, or I could output a static value. In this case, I'm going to say underweight. I'm going to add another rule. Else, if the BMI is less than 25, then they are normal. And I'm going to add another rule. Else, if the BMI is less than, I think it's 30, then they are over. And otherwise, they're going to be obese. Let's click OK. And there you go. That's my new BMI bucket column. 0M code authoring here. This one is actually coming in the April update. Let me check my sheet sig. So I covered everything. The only one that I didn't cover here is SAP BW. I mentioned it earlier. I have 20 seconds left, but basically I wanted to show you. This is coming in the March update this week. It's a preview feature. You can go to the options dialog, go to preview features, make sure you turn it on. I'm actually, oh yeah, that won't work. Once you turn it on, you come back to get data, database, is the last option here, SAP BW. You're going to be able to connect to your BW cube. It's a multi-dimensional source. You're going to be able to either specify MDX statement to execute or just connect and navigate through it, similar to our analysis services import experience. And you're going to be able to create reports on top of SAP BW data. Coming as a preview now, over the next few months, we'll reach GA. Desktop only for the March update, but very soon we'll also have gateway support for end-to-end refresh scenarios. Hope you guys liked the session. The only other thing I wanted to call out here is that someone told me really important, give you a reminder that now you can go fill session evaluations. If you like the content, it's really important for all of us that you go tell us what you liked, what you didn't. If you didn't like my jokes, or if you did, just go vote for them. I'll make more or less in my next sessions in the next few conferences. Hope you guys enjoyed these 2 days. They really flew by, at least for me. I hope to see you guys around after this session and then in future conferences that we organize from Microsoft. Thank you so much and have a good rest of the day.